I remember a time in high school when I felt completely out of place. Now, I want to preface this story with telling you that my 4 years of high school, I spent in 5 different high schools, including finishing out in homeschool. And so it makes sense that I would feel out of place. This one particular time, it was in lunchtime, and I walked into the cafeteria with my bag lunch because in those days, that's what we had, the brown paper bags, and brought it in there. So I scanned the room for a familiar face, but because it was a new high school, I didn't really know anybody. And so there wasn't a familiar face. Every table felt full, and not just with people, but with circles I didn't belong to. So I ended up sitting alone. I ended up finding a place where nobody was there and tried to enjoy my meal with as much not being noticed at all. It kind of felt invisible. It's not what I wanted to do, but it's just that I did not fit in at that time. Perhaps you've had a moment in life that was like that, where you felt kind of pushed to the edges of life, overlooked, kind of like an outcast. And it's not just high school cafeterias that feel like this. People often feel pushed to the margins in other kinds of ways, right? Perhaps it's a single parent who feels judged at church, or an immigrant struggling to find belonging in a new culture. It might be someone battling mental illness and feeling like a burden more than a person. Or it could be a person sitting in a pew on Sunday, smiling on the outside, but wondering if they really matter. If they really matter to God, and if they really matter to those that are around them. See, marginalization isn't always loud, and it isn't always obvious. It's often quiet, creeping through in exclusion, in silence, and oftentimes in shame. In Mark chapter number 5, we meet someone who lived in that very space every day. Not just emotionally, but physically cast out, living among the tombs, forgotten by society. Or maybe I might even say, pushed there by society. But Jesus did not ignore him. You see, Jesus crossed the boundaries, walked into his brokenness, and brought healing to this person that everyone else just wished would go away. And see, this story reminds us that no one is too far, no one is too broken, no one is too forgotten for Jesus to restore. As we step into the miracles of Jesus today, I hope that this is what we learn from Jesus' miracle. That Jesus meets the broken at the margins. He heals their wounds. He restores their worth. And he sends them forth with a story to tell. And I want to say to you that this is not just where Jesus should be. I think this is where we as his followers should be as well. For if Jesus was willing to meet people in the margins, if Jesus was willing to meet people that some might consider an outcast, if Jesus was willing to meet those that were struggling, that were silent, that were sitting alone, then as followers of Jesus, we too should be taking notice of those around us who feel marginalized. Let's read the story. You're probably familiar with the story, and I just want to kind of take a couple of portions of Scripture to kind of paint this picture for us from Mark chapter number 5, verses 1 through 20. That's the entire story, all right? Here's what it says in Mark chapter 5, verse 1. Let's read a couple of verses here. It says, "And they came unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes." Now, I just want to stop for a second. This story piggybacks off of our story last week. Remember, what did we talk about last week? Jesus and the disciples are out in the boat, and a great storm comes up, but Jesus already told them they were going to the other side. Well, guess where the other side is? Mark chapter 5, verse number 1. Jesus shows up on the other side, and he says, I have something to do here. You'll actually hear Jesus say that a lot. He'll say something like, I need to go over here, or we need to go here. And it's usually because Jesus needs to meet with someone that most of society has pushed out and ostracized. And he needs to meet them right where they're at so that he can bring restoration and he can bring healing to those that society has forgotten about. Here's what verse 2 says. It says, and when he came out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tomb a man with an unclean spirit. In some Bibles, they subtitle this, Jesus heals the maniac, or the wild man, or the man possessed with a multitude of demons. But the reality is this man was cast on the outside of society because society refused to care about him. I want to kind of define who the marginalized are. So if you're following along in your notes, I wrote the question down. Who are the marginalized? And I want to try to define it. And I don't know that there's a great definition for it. But if you're taking notes today, you might want to write some of the words down here. So here's something that I found online. Here's what it says. The marginalized are people pushed to the edges of society. I just want to stop right there. Where's this demon-possessed man living? Do you know where he's living? Well, he ain't got a home, so he's homeless, right? And he's living in the tombs, is what it says. He's living in the place where they bury dead people. That's where he's living. And he's meandering through life, trying to figure out how to do life, right? And so the marginalized are people who are pushed to the edges of society. They are excluded from full participation due to systematic disadvantages like discrimination or poverty or lack of representation. They often have limited access to resources, rights, and opportunities. And I would like to say something here because when I read that definition, immediately my mind thought and said to myself, well, there are a lot of people that are like that, but it's their own choice that they're there. And I think that's a gross oversimplification of what's going on. And it might just be an outright lie that we tell ourselves so we don't have to engage in the care for people. And I want to let you know that it does not matter how someone finds themselves on the outside. It is Jesus' followers' responsibility to meet people where they are at and represent Jesus well. That's a struggle for me. It's a struggle for me because often I'm very quick to judge or cast judgment upon people and make their marginalization their own fault. But I don't know that that's accurate. Let's follow along the text. If you read through it, in the first 7 to 8 verses, Jesus meets someone who is clearly on the margins of society, on the outside looking in. Here's how the Bible describes this man. The man was living in a cemetery, so he was homeless. He was possessed by an unclean spirit. Actually, he was possessed by a multitude of them. He did not identify as a follower of Christ or of Judaism. Actually, he was a pagan. Because when you go from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, what you do is you go from a religious environment that's talked about for Judaism, and you go into a pagan environment that worships idols. So this man, in all understanding, was a pagan man who probably ate from the food that was offered to dead relatives in the cemetery as a means to atone. He was unkept, unclean, a social outcast. Often the townspeople would try to control him by chaining him up. That's how they dealt with this person. They chained him up. He was always crying out day and night. He was mutilating himself. People saw him as unvaluable, unimportant, someone they wished would go away. Someone they wished the rulers of the land, the officials, the police would clean up and take away. In fact, when the demons are cast out, the people are more worried about the loss of pigs than they are about the restoration in this man's life. Can I just say, I do not like the picture that is being painted here about how we deal with people that we often don't agree with, or with people that we think are nuisances, people that we think should go get a job, or should, I could just really go on along the list of the things that we've heard spouted on TV that seem to push people into greater isolation and shove people to the margins even more. And I want to let you know that I don't think Jesus is well pleased with some of the stances that we of his people have taken on dealing with those who are kind of out on the outcast, on the outside. One scholar says this, David Garland says, he is banished as an outcast from society and must deal with those whose sleep will not be disturbed by his shrieks echoing through the night as he lacerates his body with stones. That's just a gripping picture, is it not? That he's in such pain that he goes to self-mutilation to kind of ease the pain that he's experiencing. Have you ever encountered the marginalized? Maybe it's not that you were visiting the grave and you heard someone screaming from the other side, or some crazed person, but have you ever encountered them? And how would you label people that are marginalized in our society? How would you label them? What would that look like to you? As I want you to think for a minute, because throughout history, there have always been shifts in what constitutes marginalized people. Jews under Roman occupation would have considered themselves marginalized. People born with disability, even Jews born with disability, would have been left to beg for daily necessities, marginalized. Lepers, who we've already spoken about, had to roam through the streets if they were in the city, and had to cry out, unclean, unclean, and had to live in separate places where only lepers were, marginalized. In fact, I'm afraid to say that we do a fair bit of marginalizing ourselves. But here's the truth. Any one of us can feel like we're on the margins at any given time. And the truth is, we can be pushed out in the margins at any given time. Shannon and I were just having a conversation about when we visited Rome and the ostracization that we felt being Americans, being looking a certain way. And the truth is that Jesus has called us to tear down the barriers that divide us. Because when we create a barrier, we marginalize people who are outside the barrier. And we're not called to label the marginalized or even judge them, but what we are called to do is reach them. We should be going into those places just as Jesus reached into the marginalized areas. So it made me ask the question, what are the causes of this marginalization? And so if you're following along in the notes, I thought about this for a little bit. And I was just trying to come up with what causes people to push people out of their camp and circle their camp, right? Because that's what the marginalization is. What causes people to kind of say us and them, right? Because when we do that, we say us, we're the in, and they're the marginalized. That's the implication of that, right? And we live in a world where this happens every day. More often than not, I think one of the major marginalizations in our country has to do with our politics. Never, ever have I been in such a political state where we have circled the wagons around what political party you affiliate with. And everyone else, well, to put it lightly, they're just idiots. That's the rhetoric we hear. Are you with me? Now, I'm not saying that I think that way, but that's the rhetoric that we hear, and it leads to greater marginalizations of people who don't think like we think. And we think that's something new, right? That this is just new. This is not new. Here, one scholar says this: the politics of Jesus' day were every bit as complicated as those of our own. Now, you wouldn't think that, but that's true, right? Because I'm not even going to go down that road. Let me keep reading, all right? After the death of Herod the Great in 4 BC, when the country was divided up between his sons, Philip got the bit to the northeast of the Sea of Galilee, but the bit to the southeast, where this story takes place, had never really been Jewish territory. It was called the Decapolis, and you'll see that in your Bible, reading the word Decapolis, which means there are 10 cities. We're just talking about one. There are 10 cities over there, even though different writers, even in the ancient world, could never agree on which cities are the 10 cities. But the point is clear. It wasn't Jewish land, and these weren't Jewish people. So the implication is, why is Jesus spending time with people who are not Jews? Do you see the marginalization? Even in the implication, right? So there was marginalization, political marginalization, even in Jesus' day. Oh, by the way, we forgot the biggest one, didn't we? The Jews were under Roman rule, right? So we see this. Remember, the religious crowd was already asking about Jesus. Remember what they ask about Jesus? Why is Jesus eating with those riffraff, publicans and sinners, the people that we should ignore? This brings me really closely because I think they're tied, particularly in Judaism. Not only do we marginalize people because of politics, but we marginalize people because of spirituality, right? They're not Jewish. They're not Christian. They're not Catholic. And you name the label. And spirituality can be used as a divisive means to marginalize people. Why do you think Jesus confronted the Pharisees and Sadducees so sternly? Because they loved to use religion to marginalize people. The man who rushes out to meet Jesus, the man who rushes out to meet Jesus is about as unclean as you can get. No shower, no bath, probably blood stain all over his clothes. And yet, what does Jesus do? Does he back away? Does he say, hey, you're unclean, you can't come any closer than that? No, he allows this man to come and kneel before him. And I'm really just getting started. I feel like we could probably stay here. How about the divide between the rich and the poor? Right? Or the poor and the middle class and the rich. Whatever you put it in, finances are a major struggle in the world in which we live, where most of the world lives in abject poverty. How about nationality? Have you ever seen nationalities pushed to the side? Because you're a certain nationality, you shouldn't have a say or you shouldn't have a go, right? Or how about age? You know, we talk about age discrimination. Basically, we're just talking about marginalization. How about education or immigration status or marital status, right? You know, we use these things to marginalize people, but Jesus is asking us, he's inviting us to tear down the walls and live as he did. So what is Jesus' message to the marginalized? Well, if you're following along in the sermon notes, go ahead and flip it over to the back and you'll see what I think he does here. You see, Jesus doesn't isolate the marginalized, he embraces them. And he embraces them so that he can emancipate them, and he emancipates them so that he can empower them. That's its goal. Let's break this down. Here's the first thing. Jesus embraces the marginalized. Everyone who lived with this wild man pushed him aside, wanted him done away with. Out of their earshot, out of their eye shot, they pushed him aside. But Jesus did not stop his advance. Jesus did not stop his show of worship. Jesus did not stop him from having a conversation with him, even though he was a little disheveled, even though he was a little crazy, even though he looked like he lived in the cemetery for months on end, even though he probably smelt pretty ripe. Jesus does not push him aside. Why? Because Jesus sees he has a need. And Jesus cares for those who have a need. You see, everyone else saw the man struggle. Well, not really. What they really saw was how they were annoyed by his struggles, and they labeled that his symptoms. But Jesus saw his soul tormented. And Jesus was more interested in bringing restoration to his soul than being pushed aside by his symptoms. Because he understood if he could heal the soul, then the symptoms would slowly dissipate. And so Jesus begins to deal with his soul. He saw his torment. Jesus saw the hurt inside this man, and he had compassion on him. Now, I'm going to be honest with you that sometimes when I get a little bit frustrated with the people in the margins of our world, compassion's often not the first emotion that I feel. If I'm being really honest with you, I would tell you I'm a little bit angry. But Jesus recognized that there was something much deeper going on. And the truth is, even coming to church this morning, we look pretty well put together, don't we? Some of us a little better than others, I know, I get it. But none of us know what's going on in the soul, do we? And so we need to remember this, that we can't make judgments based upon what we see on the outside. We got to get a little closer. We got to give people the benefit of the doubt. We've got to lean on Jesus to tell us what our thoughts should be instead of making them ourselves. Then look what it says. Not only does Jesus embrace the marginalized, which is a show of compassion, but Jesus emancipates the marginalized. So what did Jesus do? Well, this man comes out of the tombs. You can probably smell him. You can see him. Everything that's there, it's probably a sight for sore eyes. But Jesus engages the person in dialogue, right? Look at it, Mark chapter 5, verse 6. And when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him and cried with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God?" Now, I just want to stop right there, and I want to let you know that the man is speaking, but the man doesn't know that Jesus is the Son of the Most High God, but who does? Yeah, the demons inside him know who this is. They've already battled before. So they know exactly what's going on. And so some would say that this man's act of contrition may not be accurate as we want to say he come to worship Jesus. Well, it may not. But I want to ask you a question. Have you ever engaged in false worship before? Have you ever prayed and instead of surrendering to God's will, you wanted a little of yours to be done? Right? Yeah. Okay, so let's not be too hard on him. At least he's going to the right place. But the demons don't want to have anything to do with Jesus, right? Why? Because they know what nobody else knows, and that is that Jesus has the power to dispatch them. And so they come to Jesus feigning worship because they want to get on Jesus' good side. They're hoping to gain something from Jesus. Perhaps Jesus won't cast them out of this man. Perhaps he will marginalize them just like everyone else did. But they don't know Jesus too well, right? The next verse says, and he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. Jesus knows exactly what's going on because Jesus doesn't look at the symptoms. He looks at the soul, right? And he sees what's going on. And he asked him, what is your name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him how much that he would not send them away out of the country. You understand what they're saying? Okay, you can cast me out of him, but don't make us leave this country because there's a bunch more people here that we can inhabit, right? That we can deceive, that we can control. Now there were nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding, and all the devils besought him, saying, send us into that swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave, and the unclean spirits were out, and they entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, that is swine, and they were choked in the sea. This is a fascinating story. It's a fascinating story for a couple of reasons. Number one, never in the Bible do we hear Jesus bargaining with a set of demons. But we see Jesus' understanding and his power on display because he gets exactly what he wants anyway. This man healed, the demons cast into the sea. With the man at first, he has this conversation, and then with the demons who possessed the man. The Bible says that they were possessed by many demons, a legion, and the word legion represents a military unit consisting of 6,000 foot soldiers and 120 horsemen. I don't know how many demons this man was possessed by, but it was more than a few. It was a bunch. But at the word of Jesus, the demons cannot stay. You see, Jesus has power not only over a demon, he has power over all demons. And his power is on display. The townspeople arrive after they heard that their swine had been cast into the sea and their livelihood had been threatened. And they find the man clothed, completely freed from his former self, in his right mind. And they were bewildered. The one they had tried to control with chains is calmed. The one they had tried to ostracize is presentable. The marginalized has been made whole. But notice the townspeople aren't really having it. They're like, no, we're afraid, and they ask Jesus to leave. We don't know what you're doing here. We don't know what's going on. We do know that that man was crazed, and now he is not. He was unpresentable, and now he's presentable. He was out of control, and now he is controlled. I don't understand this. There's something at work here. They did not understand it. And it's okay because remember, this was not Jewish people. This is not where Jesus had been performing all of his miracles. This is new to them. There hasn't been a lot of messengers there up until this point in time. But I want you to notice the end of the story because what we see here is that Jesus embraced the marginalized. Jesus set the marginalized free and made them in proper standing with him, and then he empowers the marginalized. I said this once, the once wild man asked to accompany Jesus on his journey. But notice what Jesus says, Mark chapter 5, verse 18. It says, and when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with devils prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but said unto him, go home to your friends and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and how the Lord has had compassion on thee. And he departed and began to make it known in not only his town and not only his friends, but all of those cities how great things Jesus had done unto him. And people marveled. They were astonished at what Jesus had done. Now, Jesus has taken someone from the outskirts of society whose soul was hurting, healed him, and unleashed him on the community. Not like he used to be unleashed, for now he wasn't mutilating himself. Now he wasn't screaming uncontrollable. Now he wasn't wandering through the cemeteries. Now he was walking through the streets where he grew up, proclaiming the goodness of Jesus. He had a story to tell. It sounded something like this. I once was crazy, but now I'm calmed. I once was bruised and broken and battered, but now I am set free. And it's not because I picked up the latest self-help book from Barnes & Noble. It's because I had a meeting with the one who calms the souls of mankind, whose power is undeniable. I am living proof that Jesus is more powerful than the demons. I am living proof that Jesus is there to heal us. You see, Jesus embraced him. Jesus freed him. And now Jesus was giving this wild man a new purpose in life. What's the purpose? Go. Go to the margins. Go to the cities. Go to the highways. Go to the byways. Go wherever you meet people and tell them of the greatness of Jesus. The man in the tombs started the day as a broken outcast, tormented and alone, but he ended it clothed in his right mind and sent out with a mission. That's what Jesus does. That's who he is. He meets us in our mess. And I don't care what your mess looks like. We all start following Jesus from a place of messiness because he met us there. He restores what has been lost. And he reminds us that we still have a story worth sharing. And he tells us, go and share. So whether you're feeling a little pushed aside, overlooked, unworthy perhaps, know this: Jesus sees you. He knows the hurt of your heart. He doesn't avoid the margins. He makes the margins his mission. And he says, I will meet you where you are. Then when he meets us, he breaks the chains, literally and spiritually. He restores dignity to those who have been shamed, peace to those who have been tormented, and purpose to the world that has been discarded. He doesn't ask the man to get it all together first. He doesn't lead him through lessons of discipleship, or he doesn't have him prove anything to him. He steps into the chaos and brings healing, and then invites him to be a partner in the healing process. That's what Jesus does when he meets us in our chaos. But the story doesn't end with the healing, does it? The story doesn't end with the wild man becoming tame, or the demon-possessed man becoming free. Jesus doesn't restore the man. He sends him out on a mission. Go home to your friend and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. For those of us who Jesus has met in the midst of our messiness, he has invited us into the same story. Go out to your friends, to your coworkers, to your colleagues, to your neighbors. Yes, even to your enemies. And then go find some margins where people are forgotten about. And be Jesus to them. Tell them that there is healing. There is dignity. There is honor. There is purpose in the person of Jesus. Tell them what great things God has done for you.